At the University of Iowa, Courtney is part of a research study that is investigating how schizophrenic brains function and malfunction.
We'll put the bonnet on.
Schizophrenia is as complex as the brain itself, and clues to its biology have been stubbornly elusive.
Schizophrenia is definitely an enigma. It's never been possible to identify an obvious disease-related feature that distinguished schizophrenia from all other conditions. You look at a brain of a patient with schizophrenia under a microscope, you don't see anything that would make you say, aha, this is a disorder of these cells or those cells.
What has gone wrong inside the brain of someone suffering from schizophrenia? For centuries, the answer has eluded researchers. But new imaging technologies have revealed how the brain fails to function properly. Focusing attention on several different brain regions that are underperforming. Regions responsible for thinking and reasoning, memory, and emotion. The fact that so many regions are malfunctioning has led researchers to investigate a part of the brain which coordinates their operation, the prefrontal cortex.
There's certainly a lot of evidence that the prefrontal cortex functions like the conductor in an orchestra, and that it maintains harmony and it makes music out of many, many disparate elements of this orchestration. And that we think that part of the problem when the frontal cortex is deficient, as it may be in schizophrenia, is that instead of music, there's noise.
One of the things that happened to me was that I was constantly like stupefied, and I do have a little bit of trouble staying coherent, staying to one particular subject. You know, because my mind is somewhere else.
This time I want you to tell me the color of the ink. Ignore what the word says and tell me the ink. Red, blue, brown. Okay?
All right.
As quickly as you can. Ready? Go.
Red, blue, brown, red, green, blue, brown, brown.
A poorly functioning
blue,
prefrontal
red,
cortex
blue, red,
makes
green,
thinking difficult.
brown, blue,
It is no surprise that many people with schizophrenia don't perform well on a series of tests designed to measure their ability to think and reason clearly.
red, blue.
Courtney was once a good student, but as the disease progressed, his grades began to drop, and he finally had to put off plans for college.
Schizophrenia is a disease that affects the highest human functions, the parts of us that are most evolutionarily advanced, our ability to think at high conceptual levels.
Scientists had once hoped that MRI images of the brain would help solve the mysteries of schizophrenia by identifying damage to specific brain structures. Instead, the images revealed a new mystery.
We were surprised to see that there was no obvious hole in the head. But what there was that the ventricles of the brain, which are these centers in the brain that have spinal fluid, water in them, that are just cavities, were slightly bigger in patients with schizophrenia.
Why were the ventricles, reservoirs of fluid that cushion the brain's delicate tissue, larger in schizophrenia? The oversized ventricles proved to be evidence that other areas of the brain were smaller.
Your skull is made of hard bones that does not expand. So if the ventricles, these cavities, got bigger, the only way all this could stay inside your skull was that something else had to get smaller. And there have been a lot of studies subsequently showing that there is a slight, very slight, thinning of the surface of the brain, the cortex, probably that accounts for these changes in the ventricles.
Once again, evidence pointed to a connection between damage in the prefrontal cortex and schizophrenia, which may help explain why the disease appears most often during adolescence.
How can I trust you when I know what you've done? Baby, please believe that all that is done.
If I decide to go along,
I promise I won't do you wrong.
are you sure?
Researchers are now looking more closely at developments in the normal adolescent brain for clues to what might trigger the onset of schizophrenia.
The adolescent brain is far more flexible, far more adaptable than we had ever realized before. There's enormous potential for change, and not just change in sort of psychological dimensions, but actual physical, anatomical changes.
At the beginning of adolescence, the prefrontal cortex goes through a burst of growth as neurons reach out to connect to other neurons, much as they do throughout the brain during early childhood. And just as in children, the connections between neurons in the teenage brain grow stronger, or they are pruned back and wither away.
Sort of nature's way of making sure that the connections that do survive are hardy and robust. One of the ways the brain seems to try to figure out which connections to keep and which ones to eliminate or prune is based on the activities of the teen. The brain is searching for, what am I going to need to be good at to survive in this environment? And the way that it figures that out is, what am I doing now?
Adolescence could be characterized as a stressful time for the brain. There are chemical changes, hormonal changes, anatomical changes, changes in the expression of genes inside of cells. It's a time of great biological tumult. And the frontal lobe is fighting to adapt to the environment, to deal with all these inner instinctual surges. It's difficult. It's difficult with a frontal lobe that's normal to make it through adolescence. But we believe that patients with schizophrenia don't have a frontal lobe that's normal. We believe it didn't develop normally, probably from early in life.
Are there clues to schizophrenia in childhood that may explain the brain's later failure during adolescence? Can the child's brain be hiding within it the seeds of its own later malfunction? Psychologist Elaine Walker is trying to answer those questions by examining the home movies of children who later developed schizophrenia.
We were looking for evidence that there was some abnormality in brain function. And of course, one of the best places to look for that in young children is in their motor development. This child only uses one hand to try to catch the ball. This child is showing some unusual posturing of his left hand, hyperextension of his fingers. Normal children develop crawling in a symmetric fashion. This is a very asymmetric crawling pattern, and that is another characteristic that we observed more often in the children who later developed schizophrenia.
Walker's observations cannot be used to predict schizophrenia. Although these eccentric movements appear more frequently in children who eventually develop the disease, they can be found in normal children as well. But Walker's study is consistent with the theory that schizophrenia is caused by events in early brain development, even, perhaps, just months after conception.